Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Career Chat. I'm Krista Harmon. I'm from the Kent Intermediate School District's Career Readiness Department, and we are so thrilled to have Rachel Devadatta with us today. She is a speech language pathologist, and we have her for about 30 minutes to kind of hear about her experiences, hear about that field, and to get a sense of next steps for you guys as you finish out high school, how you can even get into a field like this. So welcome, Rachel. So glad you're here.
Thank you. So glad to be here. Thanks for coming, everybody. I really love my job, so I'm excited to tell you all about it.
So just to get you started, let's take you back to their age. You know, a lot of them are kind of 14, 15, 16, maybe 17 years old. Did you always want to be a speech language pathologist or not? And kind of share your early career path with us and how you got to where you are.
So early high school, I knew that I wanted to work with kids, but I wasn't sure in what field. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I knew I didn't really want to be a pediatrician, but I knew I wanted to work with kids. So in early high school, I thought I wanted to be a child life specialist, which is another medical-based field. But then when I was 16 years old, I got a job working at a summer camp for kids with special needs. And so through that opportunity, I was hearing about the different therapies that children with special needs take part in. And I heard about speech therapy and I thought, that sounds interesting. I've always loved my language arts and second language classes, and I knew I wanted to work with kids. So that's how I heard about the field that I'm currently in. So I was lucky to hear about it young. So I applaud all of you guys for attending these sessions. You can, learn about all the fields that are out there.
I want to pull out a piece of information that I really find key in what you just said is that you took an active step to start volunteering or working at a special needs camp. So I want to encourage young people as you're starting to figure this out to get into some situations. If you like kids, start working with them in a volunteer situation, offering your time, because just as Rachel said, you're going to start to learn about the different fields that are behind the scenes, which will open up opportunities. So I love that, Rachel. So you decided in high school, like, man, I'm going to head towards the speech route. Was it hard to pick a college? Was it based on who had what program? Tell us about the education side and what you decided to do.
Yeah, so since I knew from high school that I wanted to go into this field, I definitely looked at schools that had a strong undergraduate focus in speech pathology. In a lot of undergraduate programs, it's called communication sciences and disorders. So this is a field that you need a master's to work in. So when I was applying straight out of high school, I knew that I wanted to get my bachelor's in this field to prepare me to get my master's. So I only, actually, you know what, at the time that I was applying for schools, I was still deciding between speech pathology and occupational therapy, which is another way to work with kids with special needs. And as I found out, like, speech has a lot of different areas and specializations that you can do. So I applied to schools that had programs for both of those both of those fields. And then ended up attending Calvin, which is how I ended up in Michigan. And Calvin has a 5-year master's program. So I did my bachelor's degree in 3 years and then spent 2 years in grad school to get my master's degree in speech pathology. So I really recommend Calvin, and especially that model, the 5-year model, because otherwise I would have spent 6 years in total getting my degrees.
So when you look at tuition, that's a whole year of tuition that you saved by doing a 5-year program. So heads up, young people, be thinking about that as you're looking at schools, because there are different schools that have a 5-year, business administration or 5-year pharmacy track. So if you can find a school that has that, that's terrific. So when you think about those classes, is there certain, like, do you have to be good in science? Should you have to be good in language arts? What are some of those strengths that you know that you kind of brought to the table that, and maybe with your colleagues, that make a good speech pathologist?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest things that makes a great speech pathologist are people skills. So it's a field that's all about communication. You are helping your patients or your clients or your students to communicate better. So if that's something that you enjoy, working with people, communicating with other people, this is a really great field to be in. I think I did have to take a lot of science classes in college, and then also some like English based, so the sounds of the English language and English grammar and things like that. But I do think if you don't come in necessarily with those skills, I know, like, I came in hating science. I was not a person who was like, I want to learn everything about the human body possible. And then, you know, I did have to take anatomy, and you figure it out. And it ended up being really interesting to me. But I think a really, really important one is people skills and kind of that wanting to help people.
Yeah, I think we're definitely hearing that from different guests we've had on that people skills is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to do speech pathology as an undergrad, or help young people understand that that's not as concrete as it has to be? Because I know some get really stressed out of having to pick just the right undergrad. Since you have to get a master's anyway, what are your recommendations about undergrad?
Yeah, so that's a great point. If you get your bachelor's in something else, you can always go to grad school for speech pathology. You might have to take some prerequisite classes before you enroll to get your master's. But you can get your undergrad in things like psychology or child development. I know people who have gotten their degrees in education and then end up going back to school to become speech pathologists. I had a few women in my program who were what we called what are considered non-traditional students. So they had worked in other fields and then decided they wanted to be speech pathologists. So you definitely don't have to have a bachelor's in speech pathology, but programs will require that you take a few undergraduate level classes before you can start the master's. But yeah, it's definitely an option.
That's such an encouragement because, again, there's a lot of stress to have it all figured out as an 18-year-old. So young people, what I recommend to you as you think about this is to go start to look at those programs as master's level and see what those prerequisites are so you can kind of start to build that in, but you don't have to do it all as undergrad. So for a lot of young people that may not know what a speech pathologist, speech and language pathologist, why don't you give us the big picture? Because I think there's a lot of myths around even the swallowing stuff that you do or dealing with people with cancer. So kind of give us the nuts and bolts of what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer is there's no short way to describe what a speech and language pathologist can do. The main breakdown is that there are speech pathologists working in medical settings and speech pathologists working in educational settings, so in schools. And even beyond that, there's even more nuances to what we can do. So in the medical setting, speech pathologists work in hospitals, they work in rehab centers, they work in the NICU with newborns. And so the focus is on language skills, cognition skills. So after a brain injury or a stroke, if somebody is having difficulty paying attention or remembering things, the speech pathologist would help with that. So language, cognition, and swallowing. So in the hospitals, speech pathologists will do X-ray swallow studies to take a look at how somebody is swallowing their food after something like a stroke or a brain injury. And then they'll do therapy to help improve that person's ability to safely eat. So definitely hugely important. Like no matter what field you go in or what part of the field you go into, you're just doing really important work. So I did my medical-based internship with Spectrum Health in an outpatient rehab center. So I was working with adults who had strokes, traumatic brain injuries, and then diseases that progress over time. So just getting to meet such amazing people and help them in their daily lives. And then in the educational setting, there's speech paths who work with kids from birth until 3 years old. And that is home-based. So you go to these clients' home, you play with them. A lot of early speech therapy is play, working on communication through play. And then in the school setting, you can work with kids as young as preschool up through what we call transition age. So that's past high school age, but students that need that extra support before fully graduating from school. So currently I work in an elementary school. My youngest student is 3 years old and my oldest student is 12 years old. And I just saw in the chat, someone asked about kids with special needs, and that is the majority of what I do. So I work with students who have autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and other developmental disabilities. And so within that population, there's just so many different facets of what I do. So I might be working on speech sounds. So if a kid has trouble saying their S sound in therapy, we'll work on that sound and then saying it in sentences and words. If a kid has a limited vocabulary, we'll work on improving their vocabulary. And then we also work on social skills. So if a child doesn't yet know how to interact with their peers or how to start an interaction with an adult, we'll work on that. And then in all of those settings, one of the specializations within my field is called alternative and augmentative communication. You don't need to remember that, but that is when speech therapists work with people who are nonverbal. So sometimes people are surprised, oh, but you work on speech. How are you working with people who are nonverbal? But when people have a disability that means that they can't speak, we come up with systems other than speech. So a lot of my students have binders with pictures in them. So if they want something, they'll give you the picture because they're not able to say it. So it can look something like that. It can even look like really high-tech systems where someone might have a tablet with pictures on it and they might be using their eyes. So they might be looking at what they want. And it's, so that's a whole tangent I could go on. That's definitely one of my passions within the field because it's so rewarding to see people go from really, really limited communication and a lot of frustration to being able to communicate what they want to, just like you and I do every day and take for granted. So like I said, there's no short answer of what speech language pathologists do. And a mentor that I had said that one of the reasons she was so glad she chose this field is you never get bored. There's always something new to do. If you do your first internship and you hate it, no worries, because there's something totally different that you can do with that same degree that you'll probably love.
I think that's so key, especially as these young people are exploring that. Again, you guys, you don't have to have it all figured out. These things evolve. I mean, Rachel knew that she loved special needs students and through her volunteer work, so she landed there. But as you can see by her passion, that there's this whole augmented kind of field that, you know, with computers and all that. And so it just evolves and there's new technologies all the time. So thank you so much for sharing. That was a great, because I think I had heard about a speech pathologist with someone who had cancer in their throat. Yeah. So they end up having to work. So again, very medical and or the school setting.
Exactly. So and the nice thing about getting your degree in speech pathology is you are prepared for all of those settings. You don't have to specialize. So once you have your master's, you could be working, with adults who have cancer and helping them regain their ability to speak and swallow. Or you could be working with newborns in the hospital, or you could be working with little 3-year-olds in their home. So one degree can just prepare you to do so many things.
My son, when he was 3, up to 3, he only used the word H. So a cheetah was a hita. Just H, and so we did a lot of play with the speech pathologist, and she actually told me later that she didn't know she was gonna be able to fix him, and she did, and it was very rewarding. But it was a lot of fun for him. He didn't mind going, obviously, because she made
exactly, and that's what's so great. It's you can make it so fun for who you're working with.
I know the young people often want to know, like, how'd you get from here to there? So when we look at your master, or even your undergrad to your master's, does the college help you with internships? Is that something you have to find yourself? Kind of help them understand how that gets navigated.
Yeah, so internships are required for your master's. So I think that this is true for every program, that they match you with an internship. You still have to apply and you still have to interview, but they have those connections in the community. So they kind of have a list of things that you can apply for. So at Calvin, we completed 3 different internships. And each time, so for example, for the medical-based one, they had opportunities with Mary Free Bed and with Spectrum and with various other medical facilities in the community. And then we would submit our resume and interview, and then the supervisor would hire us. It wasn't paid or anything as formal as being hired, but so that was nice that, we didn't have to go searching for an internship, the opportunities were there for us. But then we still got that experience of applying and interviewing, which are really important skills. And yeah, and then for my school-based internship, it was the same, where we kind of got to look at a list and decide which ones we were most interested in, and then go through that same process of applying and interviewing.
So I know nursing, there's a reputation for being very competitive. Is this also a field that's pretty competitive? And what would you recommend to young people to kind of set themselves apart from some of the other candidates?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Speech pathology is a pretty competitive program in undergrad, but then once you're actually in the field, it's so not. But yeah, that is definitely something to keep in mind, that grad schools have to be pretty selective because there are a lot of applicants. So one thing that I really recommend, and we've kind of already talked about this, is volunteering and getting that face-to-face experience. So whether it's with kids or in a nursing home or at a school, just getting those real life experiences in can really set you apart, because then you'll go into those classes kind of with some background knowledge of, oh, I worked with someone like that and I didn't even know that's what it was called. And grad programs are looking for things like that. A lot of programs are pretty selective based on GPA and standardized testing scores. But I think as time goes on, programs are trying to take a more overall view. So it's not just those numbers. Obviously, GPA and standardized test scores are important. So as much as you can, working on, trying your best in your classes, but don't feel like, oh, I can't even apply if those scores aren't great for you. Just try to get that outside experience. Shadowing can really help. So shadowing speech pathologists who are working in the field. When I applied for jobs, for real world jobs, I put on my resume some shadowing experiences that I had done to show that I took that extra step, to show that I was really interested. So
I think that's really key, is that you were very proactive in helping develop a resume that showed them that this was not just, a hobby. Like this is something that you were passionate about, that you were worth taking that risk to be in the program for sure. One of the students wants, you mentioned a little bit already about kind of what lights you up as far as helping people who couldn't communicate now be able to express themselves through even machinery. So give us another example of just something that just really you get excited about, but also some of that flip side. What are some of the challenges you find in your career, Rachel?
So I think one thing that has been really exciting lately is working on a really great team. So no matter where you work as a speech pathologist, you're going to be on a team. If you're in a school, you're working with teachers, you're working with school psychologists, occupational therapists, and then in the medical setting, you're working with doctors and depending on your setting, all those other medical professionals. And so lately I've been able to, because I've really taken some time to get to know my students, I've been able to teach the teachers and teach these students' parents some really helpful strategies for how to help that child communicate. And so that's just been so rewarding. So right now my job is all virtual. So I do sessions in the kids' homes via Zoom. And so it's been so rewarding to see parents and kids playing together and communicating in ways that they weren't before. So just having that opportunity to collaborate with really amazing coworkers and just work on a team to support each student. Some of the challenges, I would say workload is a big one in the schools. I can't speak as much for the medical setting, but in the schools we have a lot to do. There's paperwork that you have to do on top of your weekly therapy schedule and meetings. So organizational skills have been so necessary for me. In school, I was pretty disorganized, definitely a last minute person, huge procrastinator. And so now in the real world, I've kind of had to see how to change some of those habits. And in the medical setting, I think probably some challenges could be that it it's not as straightforward as a field as, say, cardiology. Everybody knows what a cardiologist does, but sometimes in the medical field, speech pathologists really have to show other people what they do, what they know, and that their recommendations are, you know, what's best for that patient. And then just in general, like where you guys are at looking into programs, I think a big challenge is just the competitiveness of the programs. It's unfortunate because the field itself is so supportive and you meet such amazing people and we're all doing the best we can for our patients and our students. But that like initial step of the schooling can be competitive.
Because everybody's trying to make sure they get in, and because they have a dream and they want to be able to get there. I can understand that. So, but don't let that freak you out, everyone.
Exactly.
Keep your eyes on the prize and do your best.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to help you or ask you to help the students understand kind of the practical things about the job shadows that you mentioned and how you ended up putting those on your resume. Did you make cold calls? Did you put on social media that you were looking for someone to follow? Like, how did you actually do that for yourself?
That is a good question, and I'll have to think back. So some of the shadowing that I did was in high school, and so I think it was kind of a cold call. Like I can't remember if I looked up like the hospital near me and then speech pathologist and found contact information that way. Definitely easier to set up shadow experiences once I was in college, because then I had my professors who have connections throughout the community. So I could say, hey, I really want to shadow at this specific clinic. Can you get me the contact information for that speech therapist? But then, yeah, once I had the contact information, it was kind of just sending an email or making a phone call and introducing myself and saying, I'm really interested in this. And you know what, now that I'm thinking, I think that the hospital I shadowed at in high school had a shadowing program, like kind of under the same department as their volunteer program. So there was like somebody that I could contact about setting that up for me.
Yeah, I can plug that. So everyone write this down, but Metro Health has a formalized job shadow program where it's, if you look up Metro Health Job Shadow, Grand Rapids, Michigan, their page will come up and you can actually fill the application. You do have to submit your immunizations and stuff, but there's somebody behind the scenes that will set that up for you. However, all during COVID time, none of the job shadow programs are going, so that's unfortunate, but that's why we're thrilled to have Rachel here today. But know that as things get back to normal, that Metro Health has one. Also, all of your schools have a speech pathologist, speech and language pathologist. So that is a great place to start, to follow them at the school, but then they also know their peers in the community, so they can help you start to network. So that would just be 2 recommendations I have for you right away. And then of course, using social media and just saying, hey, does anyone know anyone? You'd be surprised how many hits you can get just by putting it out there, for sure. So it sounds like workload and all that is very much a stress, but a loving community on the positive side. When you look at your career, you know, is there anything that you would do differently looking back that maybe is a lesson learned that you could help these young people kind of save that step of the hard knocks? Or do you feel like it was pretty straightforward once you had educated yourself about the path?
Good question. I think, I feel like for me, I feel really lucky that things like I had a great supportive program that was able to connect me with some really great internships. And then after I finished my schooling, I applied for lots of different jobs. I think that's where, so when I was in school, I just assumed I was going to stay in Michigan. But then when I ended up applying for jobs, I thought, maybe I could go somewhere else. And so now actually I work at a school in California. So I think just kind of like opening yourself up and knowing the next step might not look exactly what you think it will, but that it can be even more exciting if you're kind of open to anything.
Yeah. Did you have friends or family in California? It was just a nice young adventure for your right
just
out of college.
An adventure while I can.
Good for you. I admire that. And again, the nice thing as you students research this, if this is a career for you, is that it's a good wage. So you have that ability to pick your place, and because you will be able to afford to live. So that's a wonderful
and
thing.
Another, so thinking at the age that you guys are at, or some of you might already be, but there is a huge need in my field for bilingual speech pathologists. So if you already speak 2 languages, that is going to like you are going to be such an asset. And if you don't already, like sign up in your high school now to start learning another language. I think in any field that is such an asset, but especially in this field where we are helping kids with their vocabulary and grammar and their communication. If you can do that in 2 languages, that's double the amount of people that you can work with, basically.
That's great. That's a really great tip. One of the students is wondering how long you've actually been doing this. You're obviously pretty young, so.
Yes. Yep. So I'm in my 2nd year. I worked last year, the full school year, and then I'm just starting my 2nd year.
And as you look forward, this will probably be one of your last questions before we transition, because I do want to make sure you're done on time. Where do you see your career going? Do you like staying in the school setting? Do you see yourself kind of going more into the computerized, some of that new technology? What are you getting excited about?
Yeah. So I love working in the school setting. I work in an area where most of the families I work with are low income. So working in the public schools means that I can offer really high quality speech therapy to people who might not have the means to access it outside of school. So I want to stay in the public schools for as long as I can. And the really exciting thing is that I'm currently in a mentorship program through my company where I'm specializing in alternative communication. So being able to apply that super fast evolving part of my field to an area that really needs it. Someday I might get a PhD and do research, but for now I'm loving, doing the therapy, working with students. So
I'm happy for you. I love when people find a spot that they're so excited about. I'm going to actually ask the students to stay on. I'm going to give you some resources after I let Rachel go because she has a meeting. But just to finish up the recorded portion, Rachel, what would your kind of word of wisdom be to these young people as they're exploring and figuring this all out?
Yeah, I think trusting in yourself. I think when I was your age, I just thought oh, I don't have what it takes. I'm never going to make it. But as you go on, you see oh, I'm making it.
Mm-hmm.
So trusting in yourself and then just knowing that you will find the right place for you. I think kind of like you were mentioning, it's so easy in high school to feel like you have to figure it all out right now. And that's not the case. I have so many friends who change paths later in life. So just finding what you're passionate about and learning as much as you can about that.
That's great. Well, we so appreciate you being here. Students, stay on because I have an extra resource I want to give you today. But Rachel, we're so thrilled that you're able to share with us. It was so valuable to me as a career developer, so I'm sure they took a lot away too.
Well, so good to be here. And yeah, feel free if